The second largest collapse of a bank in recent history after Lehman Brothers could have been prevented. Now, the impact is too large and the contagion risk is difficult to measure. The demise of Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, is a classic bank run driven by a liquidity event, but the important lesson for everyone is that the enormity of the unrealized losses and the financial hole in the bank's accounts would not have existed if not for ultra-loose monetary policy. Here's why. As of December 31st, 2022, Silicon Valley Bank had approximately $209 billion in total assets and about $175.4 billion in total deposits, according to their public accounts. And it's probably no surprise to you guys that their top shareholders are Vanguard, 11.3%, BlackRock, 8.1%, State Street, 5.2%, and the Swedish pension fund Alecta at 4.5%. The incredible growth and success of SVB could not have happened without negative rates, ultra-loose monetary policy, and the tech bubble that burst in 2022. To compound that, the bank's liquidity event could not have happened without the regulatory and monetary policy incentives to accumulate sovereign debt and mortgage-backed securities. SVB's asset base read like the clearest example of the old mantra, "Don't fight the Fed." SVB made one mistake. Follow exactly the incentives created by loose monetary policy and regulation. What happened in 2021? Massive success that unfortunately was also the first step to demise. The bank's deposits nearly doubled with the tech boom. Everyone wanted a piece of the unstoppable new tech paradigm. SVB's assets also rose and almost doubled. As the bank's assets rose in value, more than 40% were long-dated treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. The rest were seemingly world-conquering and woke new tech and venture capital investments. And most of those low-risk bonds and securities were held to maturity. SVB was following the mainstream rulebook to a T. Low-risk assets to balance the risk in venture capital investments. So when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, SVB must have been in shock. Or was this a planned event? Its entire asset base was one single bet: low rates and quantitative easing for longer. Tech valuations soared in the period of loose monetary policy, and the best way to hedge that risk was with treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. So why bet on anything else? This is what the Fed was buying in billions every month. These were the lowest risk assets according to all the regulations and according to the Fed and all mainstream economists. Inflation was purely transitory, they assured us. A base effect anecdote. What could possibly go wrong? Turns out inflation was not transitory and easy money was not endless. Rate hikes happened, and they caught the banks suffering massive losses everywhere. Goodbye bonds and mortgage-backed security prices. Goodbye new paradigm woke tech valuations. And hello panic. Then there was a good old bank run despite the strong recovery of SVB shares in January. Mark-to-market unrealized losses of $15 billion were almost 100% of the bank's market capitalization. And that equals wipeout. As the bank manager said in the famous South Park episode, and it's gone.
Great, we can just put that into your retirement account and make it go to work for you, and it's gone.
SVB showed just how quickly the capital of a bank can dissolve in front of our eyes. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, will step in, but that's not enough because only 3% of SVB deposits were under $250,000. According to Time magazine, more than 85% of Silicon Valley Bank's deposits were not insured. And it gets worse. 1/3 of U.S. deposits are in small banks, and around half are uninsured, according to Bloomberg. Depositors at SVB will likely lose most of their money, and this will also create significant uncertainty in other entities. In reality, SVB was the poster child of banking management by the book. They followed a conservative policy of acquiring the safest assets, long-dated treasury bills, as deposits soared. SVB did exactly what those that blamed the 2008 crisis on deregulation recommended. Technically, SVB was a boring, conservative bank that invested its rising deposits in sovereign bonds and mortgage-backed securities, believing that inflation was transitory, as everyone except for us conspiracy theorists repeated time and again. SVB did nothing but follow regulation, monetary policy incentives, and Keynesian economists' recommendations point by point. SVB was the epitome of mainstream economic thinking, the same mainstream that just killed the tech star. Many will now blame greed, capitalism, and lack of regulation. But guess what? More regulation would have done nothing because regulation and policy incentivize buying these low-risk assets. Furthermore, regulation and monetary policy are directly responsible for the tech bubble. Increasingly elevated valuations of unprofitable woke tech and the allegedly unstoppable flow of capital to fund innovation and green investments would never have happened without negative real rates and massive liquidity injections. In the case of SVB, its phenomenal growth in 2021 was a direct consequence of the insane monetary policy implemented in 2020 when the major central banks increased their balance sheets to $20 trillion as if nothing would happen. SVB is a casualty of the narrative that money printing does not cause inflation and can continue forever. They embraced it wholeheartedly, and now they're gone. SVB invested in the entire bubble of everything: sovereign bonds, mortgage-backed securities, and tech. And of course, going super woke didn't help them either. Did they do it because they were stupid or reckless? No. They did it because they perceived that there was very little to no risk in those assets. No bank accumulates risk in an asset it believes is high risk. The only way in which banks accumulate risk is if they perceive that there is none. Why did they perceive no risk? Because the government, the regulators, the central banks, and the experts told them there was no risk. So the question is, who's next? Many people will blame everything except the perverse incentives and the bubbles created by monetary policy and regulation, and they'll demand rate cuts and quantitative easing to solve the problem. It's only going to worsen if they do that. You don't solve the consequences of a bubble with more bubbles. The demise of Silicon Valley Bank highlights the enormity of the problem of risk accumulation by political design. SVB did not collapse due to reckless management, but because they did exactly what the Keynesians and monetary interventionists wanted them to do. So when you look at it that way, SVB was a smashing success. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification icon, give it a thumbs up, share it with everybody you know. Don't forget to subscribe to my private email list through my website, highimpactflix.com, and grab a hard-hitting conversation-starting design you can get from the store. You can put it on a shirt, hoodie, mug, cell phone case, whatever you want. I'll see you in the next video.